Thank you for joining me today. This is Worth the Admission podcast. My name is B. Frank, and his name is usually Travis, but today we're trying a new type of special episode, a solo special, if you will. Today I'm discussing and reviewing M. Night Shyamalan's Glass Trilogy, which is comprised of Unbreakable from 2000, Split from 2016, and Glass from 2019. Technically, it's known as the East Row 177 trilogy, but it doesn't really roll off the tongue. Rolls off the tracks fine, but I think Glass Trilogy rolls off the tongue better. Sorry, bad pun, but it had to be said. I'm going to review each film independently, Unbreakable and Split with spoilers, Glass without spoilers, so you can listen before or after you go see it. If you haven't seen any of them, I implore you to watch them. Come back and listen because they are, in my opinion, really cool, interesting, intelligent movies with a great list of cast members. I mean, say what you will about M. Night Shyamalan, but when he does get his movies right, he gets them right. A fun fact about Unbreakable, it's actually credited as being the first superhero movie grounded in reality. The next movie or set of movies that did that was the Dark Knight Trilogy, which started in 2005, so 5 years later. And we obviously have that a lot more now with the MCU and DC when they get it right. Now, Unbreakable is also kind of a silent superhero origin story. It has a great score from James Newton Howard, who actually has scored a lot of M. Night's movies. He didn't end up doing Split or Glass, but I thought I would make a note about it. Now, the movie starts off with David Dunn, played by Bruce Willis, on a train, and the whole scene builds suspense really well. There's 3 or 4 tunnels that they go through, and they're only 4 or 5 seconds long, but you get this feeling that something's going to happen, and it's really cool because the camera pans back and forth. There's a lot of long shots in all 3 of these movies, which is really cool. The train does eventually crash, and he ends up being the sole survivor. What's weird about that is he didn't have a scratch on him. Everybody else was dead, obviously. And the doctor even asks him where he was sitting. He asks him if he was standing up. There was no reason why David Dunn shouldn't be alive. Soon after, he's contacted by Elijah Price, played by Samuel L. Jackson, whose story we get throughout the movie. It actually starts with a little scene about him being born and his arms and legs being broken. He was born with type 1 osteogenesis imperfecta, also known as brittle bone disease. He believes David Dunn is his polar opposite in that he is unbreakable, thus the title. The movie itself is very story-driven and not action-driven. There's really no action until the last 10 minutes of the movie. The overall camera work and cinematography is great. The train car through the tunnels, the panning back and forth, we see that a lot in the next movies too. One day, Elijah goes to the stadium where David works as a security guard, and David presents this kind of instinct about him, about a person in line and them having a weapon. And Elijah says that he should go somewhere where it's really crowded and try controlling it. And he actually does right afterward. And the scenes are really cool because it makes use of colors really well. It's kind of a black and white scene for the most part. But the villains or the bad people in those visions and those instinctive visions have extra saturated color. We also see this use around Elijah and the color purple. There's purple inside the envelope that he gives David. There's purple. He's got a purple suit at the end of the movie. There's a lot of purple, and that just kind of becomes his color. During their discussions, David says he hasn't been hurt or sick before, but that he had almost drowned when he was a kid. And Elijah comes to the conclusion through a voicemail that water is the weakness for both of them. Obviously, he has brittle bones, so a big wave would hurt him, whereas water with David essentially kind of weighs him down and drowns him, no matter what. It's very interesting because M. Night uses water in a lot of his movies. Signs, it was the way to attack the aliens. Obviously, Lady in the Water. There are little things throughout his movies that are kind of cool. David's son plays a small role throughout the first movie. He actually plays a bigger role in Glass. It's cool because there's a scene where he keeps adding weight onto the bench press, and David just keeps pushing it. And he basically tells his dad, he sides with Elijah, like, yes, you are a superhero. You need to be helping people. And David essentially says, no. Like, I have been hurt. There's a very intense moment with him pointing a gun at David. And then at the end of the movie, David shows his son the newspaper. And it says that some person rescued a bunch of people, and he kind of gets this smile about him. Then David just puts his finger up to his lips, is like, "Shush, don't tell your mom," and it's just a great moment. It's a great beat, and the scene is just so good. I really liked it. It's small, but made an impression. And then at the end, David finally shakes Elijah's hand, and David gets another instinctive vision. It shows him in purple in the saturated color as he is the villain, and it shows that he was behind the three disasters that the movie mentions throughout the plot. And it's the moment that you realize that Elijah is the villain. And until then, I hadn't really thought about it the first time I had watched it. And Elijah even says so at the end. He makes this really great speech. And he says, "Now that we know who you are, I know who I am. I'm not a mistake. It all makes sense. In a comic, you know who you can tell who the arch-villain's going to be. He's the exact opposite of the hero. And most times they're friends like you and me. I should have known way back then. You know why, David? Because of the kids. They called me Mr. Glass." The movie ends on that note with a little blurb about Mr. Glass going to a hospital. And that's where the movie ends. It's very tied up. It's a very singular movie. And for 16 years, it was the only movie in this trilogy. And then Split came out in 2016. And Split is noted as the first solo supervillain origin story. Obviously, we don't get that until the end. It's also Hollywood's first stealth sequel, to where obviously it wasn't promoted as being in a franchise, it was just promoted as a solo M. Night film. And then the end scene comes, and there's kind of a jaw-dropping moment. There's similar camera work in Split with Unbreakable. There's longer shots, there's a lot of panning shots. There's also, I noticed, a lot of shots with the cast split in half via pipes, walls, but still in the same frame. And I thought that was a very interesting use of set and camera work, because little things like that show you, like, there is a split of something. There's always a split of something somewhere. And the movie wastes no time getting into the story. 5 minutes in, and the girls are taken. They're taken by Kevin, who turns out to have 23 alternate personalities. He has dissociative identity disorder, DID. Hedwig is personally one of my favorites, purely from an acting standpoint, and also because his little tag on the line of everything, etc. Not all of the personalities are bad, but the strong ones stay prevalent in the story. The various personalities come from the abusive mother that he had that kind of spiraled after his father's death. And the way that they explain how the personalities take over is whoever's in the light has control, and everybody else is sitting in chairs waiting to get called upon. Barry is the dominant personality until Dennis and Patricia take over. His physiology also changes with each personality change, which is something very specific to his case. And his therapist tries to get more information on it, tries to get his case out there, but nobody's really listening, nobody's really having it. And with that physiology change, you get Dennis, who is very stern and strict. You get Patricia, that is a very proper woman, and his posture even changes. And the therapist doesn't really like those two personalities because they are the most unlikable of the group. They also worship and believe a 24th identity will come out called the Beast that will rid the world of all those who have not suffered. And at one point, Dennis says he represents the highest form of human's evolution. He believes the time of ordinary humanity is over. He's essentially the most physically superior identity that Kevin has, and it changes his physiology the most to accommodate. He kind of gets all roided out when that comes through. And that's why Dennis is taking the girls, essentially so the Beast can eat. And he planned on taking just the two. He had followed them around, but Casey was in the car, so he took her too. Dennis eventually fully takes over from Barry, and the therapist starts to see those cracks in the personality. I would like to note that McAvoy's constant fluid change from personality to personality is something to be recognized, because there are a couple shots that don't cut where he goes through 2 or 3 identities, and they're so drastic and so sudden that from an acting standpoint, it is pure gold. So kudos to McAvoy on that. Anya Taylor-Joy plays the third girl, who's kind of the next most important character behind Kevin. And after watching the movie, knowing that it's a sequel to Unbreakable, you start to notice similarities, like their names is something small but prevalent. Casey Cook, CC, David Dunn, Dee Dee. She ends up reprising her role in Glass. And her character, we find out through the end, was molested as a child by her uncle. When the end part of the movie comes, the Beast is pulling apart the bars, and he's killed the other two girls because they were impure, having never suffered. He realizes Casey is quote unquote pure. She shows signs of physical scars, and he can tell at that point that she has suffered. And then she finally gets out. She realizes she's in the Philadelphia Zoo, and then it cuts to the diner scene. Now, the diner scene is probably the most important end scene from a movie like this because, again, being a silent sequel, this scene was probably the biggest twist in M. Night's movies, period. Someone in the diner is talking about similarities with a guy in a wheelchair while the TV is discussing how the Horde is Kevin's nickname. And she says, "What was his name?" And a voice just says, "Mr. Glass." And she goes, "Yeah." And the camera pans in on Bruce Willis wearing a work shirt with the name Dunn on it. And the music in the diner is the exact same music that opens Unbreakable, which again is a very clear sign, having now watched it once before. I remember being in theaters for that, and my buddy and I were pretty floored. I was like, there is no way. And I had to go online and make sure that I understood that twist correctly. And then about a year later, he came out saying that he was going to make Glass. Now, Split was different in that obviously it was a supervillain origin story, but there was a clear good guy and bad guy versus Unbreakable. You didn't really know who the bad guy was until the end of the movie. Now, what I find is interesting, because Mr. Glass said that heroes and villains are usually polar opposites, Casey is compassionate. She's quiet, but she's compassionate, like when she's talking to Hedwig. She's very sweet. She's trying to manipulate him, but she isn't trying to be mean to him. And the Horde, as he becomes known as, never received compassion from his abusive mother. It kind of plays a part in the other movie, but something similar to that, again, polar opposites. David Dunn is superior physically, and Mr. Glass is superior intellectually, and that pairing between the Horde and Mr. Glass makes sense because you have now a good mind and a good superior physicality to the Beast to take on David Dunn. And the little tussling that they do get to in Glass is kind of worth it. Now, speaking of Glass, this is where I'm going to issue my non-spoiler spoiler alert. Anything from the story that I talk about has already been shown to the public in videos or trailers. I'm using kind of what's already been given to us to explain certain aspects of the review. If you don't like to have any information, go watch the movie and come back to this point. Otherwise, I'm still classifying this as a spoiler-free review. Now, the one thing that I would recommend is to at least rewatch Unbreakable, but I would watch Unbreakable and Split if you can, because it's probably been a while since you've seen Unbreakable just like me, and there are a lot of points from that movie that play heavily into Glass. So just kind of as a reminder to, or I guess you can just listen to this and kind of be caught up. But I thought that the main franchise characters were utilized well. Not all of them were in the entire movie, but the scenes that they were in were very heavy, were very specific, were very good use of the characters. The movie opens with a monologue from McAvoy, from Barry, and it kind of brings you in from the start. There are a lot of great monologues throughout the movie. A lot of them come at the end, and they're just kind of, I think they're really good, kind of fantastic. I also thought it was interesting that the same actor that played David's son in Unbreakable plays him in Glass. It's small, but a cool little throw-in that is always nice to see. It shows that he either wasn't busy or really wanted to be in this again, in this world. And again, this story, just like Unbreakable, and a lot like Split, is very story-driven, and there's a little bit of action in the beginning and the end, but it's very heavy on story. It's about 2 hours long, 2 hours, 10 minutes, and it uses it very wisely. As I've said before, I'm a big fan of long single shots, and there are quite a bit of them in the movie. It starts off with one panning back and forth. There's wide shots involving parts of people's bodies, torso, eye, mouth, just very close-ups or very specific shots to kind of throw you off, I feel like. The story starts as soon as the movie begins. There's no waste of time. And this whole single shot, McAvoy, again, seamlessly transitions from personality to personality. And it's so beautiful to watch. It's not like it's cutting back and forth. He is doing this in the moment. And it shows a lot of dedication, not just to acting, but to each character to be able to literally split off from one. I get it. Split off from one into another. Water plays a part, again, so keep that in mind from Unbreakable, how water affects Dunn. Colors also play another part. There's purple with Mr. Glass, his blanket, shoes, his clothes. Even a scene with just his mother, there's purple accents and purple drapes and stuff. So there's, again, a lot of use of the color. And I realized that David's color was green. I didn't really notice that in Unbreakable because it was a lot of dark scenes. The first time they're all in the room together, as we've seen in the trailer, it's hilarious watching the look on David's face when he sees Kevin's change for the first time. It's kind of like, did I just watch this? Like, what's going on? There's a notable quote by Patricia in this scene, and when she's talking to the doctor, what does your sleeping mind think of that? It's such a small line, but it's basically calling her ill-informed or dumb. Like, it's a very heavy but subtle shade throw, if you will. Now, it's pretty obvious from the trailers that there's an escape, that they escape. They're not just going to spend the whole movie inside. And so when Mr. Glass and the Horde meet up for the first time after that, it's another long single shot, and the interaction between them is just amazing because Glass sees him as each person and not as someone sick. And it's a really humanizing moment for Kevin, for McAvoy's characters. There's a line from Mr. Glass referring to a current situation like a comic book, and that's when everybody is essentially in the same shot together. When everybody kind of comes together, he goes, the collection of main characters. Again, a subtle line, but was really cool because that's kind of the first thing I thought. It had similarities for me to how the anticipation around the Avengers being on screen for the first time. It was cool to kind of have that excitement again. Now, all in all, I thought it was a good movie, good superhero movie. Again, very grounded in reality, being the different kind that it is. It's definitely worth it if you're a fan of Unbreakable or Split or of M. Night Shyamalan in general. And I thought that the trilogy was really good as well. It's kind of an unorthodox way to bring it out, but M. Night's not really known to be orthodox. Now, the end of the movie may require some explanation. I'm going to do some more research on it because obviously it's M. Night, so there's going to be a twist. It could also irritate people. It could make people really happy. For the story that was being told, I think that the end of the story worked well. It also kind of left the universe open, that if M. Night wanted to do more inside this universe, he has that availability. So whether he goes forward with that or not, something to keep an eye out. I'd be excited for that. If you have watched the movie, I would really love to know what you think, because not many people talk about this with me other than Travis. And so if you tweet at us, message us on Facebook, WTAE Podcast, let me know what you think. Let us know what you think. With that being said, thank you for joining me for this podcast's first solo special. As always, I am B. Frank, and I hope this was worth the admission.